The fluorescent lights inside Eco Grande Cafe flickered once before settling. Obinna Castellano sat at the corner table, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea he had not touched in 20 minutes. The woman sitting across from him was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that Lagos streets whispered about. But her eyes were empty in a way that made his chest ache. "So that is it?" Adaeze said, uncrossing and recrossing her legs. "You lost the company, the properties, everything? Just like that?" Obinna nodded slowly. He watched her face. He searched it for a flicker of love, of warmth, of the woman he had proposed to 8 months ago in a rooftop restaurant in Ikoyi. He found nothing. Only irritation. "I postponed the wedding because I thought it was temporary," she said, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "But if things are really this bad, Obinna, then I don't know what you expect from me. I have a life to protect." Was this really who she had always been? Or had he simply refused to see it? Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Tales from Africa so you never miss a powerful story of love, betrayal and triumph. Now let's dive into it. 3 weeks earlier, Obinna Castellano had been one of the most talked about men in Port Harcourt. His company, Fortbridge Holdings, supplied construction materials to some of the biggest infrastructure projects in the Niger Delta. He had a house in Gir, a fleet of cars, a mother who prayed for him every morning, and a fiancée the whole city envied. He was 38 years old and life by every visible measure was good. It was a Wednesday afternoon when he came back from a client meeting earlier than expected. His housekeeper, Ngozi, was in the kitchen. The television was murmuring in the sitting room. And somewhere down the hallway, Adaeze's voice floated through the half-open door of the guest bedroom. He was not trying to listen. He was simply walking to his room. "But do you actually love him?" her cousin Priscilla asked. Adaeze laughed, a short, unbothered sound that Obinna had never heard from her before. "Love is sweet, Priscilla, but love cannot buy land in Lekki. The man is worth close to 5 billion naira. Once we do the wedding, the law is on my side. I am not a fool." Obinna stopped walking. He stood there in the hallway, the sound of his own heartbeat suddenly very loud in his ears. His briefcase was still in his hand. The key to his bedroom was still in his pocket. But the world had shifted in a way that could not shift back. He stood there for a long moment. Then very quietly he walked back down the stairs and out of his own house. He drove to the office of his lawyer and childhood friend, Emeka Duru. He sat across from Emeka and said 4 words. "I need your help." By the time the sun rose over Port Harcourt the next morning, the plan had already begun. A slow, careful, believable collapse. Fake debt documents, leaked financial reports, a story that would spread across the city like morning harmattan. Fortbridge Holdings was in ruins. Obinna Castellano had lost everything. Now, sitting in that cafe watching Adaeze glance at her phone without blinking, he knew the test had worked. But something else was pressing on his mind, a quiet memory from just 2 days ago. Chisom, his house help, had knocked on his gate in the early evening. She was carrying a covered pot and a small bag of groceries, her uniform slightly dusty from the bus ride across town. He had told her gently that he could no longer afford her salary. She had looked at him and said, "Hoga Obinna, I did not come because of salary." Why did that moment feel more important than anything Adaeze had ever said to him? The morning after the cafe meeting, Port Harcourt woke up to sunshine and noise. Danfo buses honked on ABA Road, pepper sellers arranged their trays outside, and children in school uniforms rushed past rusted gates. Life moved the way it always did in this city, fast, loud, and without apology. But inside Obinna's house in Gire, everything was quiet. He sat on the edge of his bed, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the ceiling. The fake bankruptcy had been running for 3 weeks now. Emeka had done a thorough job. Frozen account alerts, a forged court document about unpaid loans, even a few planted rumors through business contacts. The story had spread exactly the way they planned. And Adaeze had reacted exactly the way Obinna feared she would. She had called the night after the news broke, her voice tight with confusion. She asked questions, sharp, practical questions about assets and accounts and whether the GRA house was still in his name. She did not ask how he was feeling. She did not say she would stand by him. When he told her things were truly bad, the phone line went quiet for a long moment before she said she needed time to think. That was her first response to the man she claimed to love. Time to think. Now, 3 weeks later, she had thought plenty. She had postponed the wedding quietly, telling people it was due to circumstances. She had stopped visiting. Her calls had reduced from 3 a day to none in a week. And yesterday in that cafe, she had sat across from him and spoken about her life to protect, as if he were a sinking ship she was choosing to swim away from. Obinna stood up and walked to the window. Outside, a woman was selling garden eggs by the roadside, her baby tied to her back with a faded wrapper. Life everywhere in every form. His phone buzzed. It was Emeka. She was spotted last night at Distinction Lounge in D-Line, Emeka said, his voice careful. She was with Barrister Festus Okafor, the man that just bought that duplex in Peter Adalai Road. Obinna said nothing for a moment. How did she look? She was laughing, brother. Comfortable. Like someone who had already moved on. He ended the call and set the phone down on the windowsill. A dull pain pressed against his ribs, not shock because some part of him had already expected this, but the quiet, heavy grief of a man who had genuinely loved someone and found out that love was one-sided all along. He had given Adaeze 2 years. Dinners in Abuja. A trip to Dubai for her birthday. Meetings with his family in Owerri. He had even learned her mother's favorite food so he could bring it whenever he visited their home in Remulla. He had done everything a man in love does. And none of it had meant anything without the money behind it. A knock came at the door, 3 light taps, the kind that did not demand but only asked. Oga Obinna? It was Chisom. He had told her twice now that he could not pay her. She kept coming anyway. She stepped inside with a tray, a bowl of ofe akwu and 2 wraps of fufu, steam still rising gently from the soup. You did not eat yesterday, she said simply, setting the tray on the side table. Chisom. He turned to look at her. I told you, the money is not there. You should be looking for another job. She straightened up and met his eyes without flinching. She was 24, plain-faced, with a quiet kind of strength that lived in the way she stood. I have another job, she said. I started cleaning at a hotel in Rumyafike 3 days ago. Morning shift. I come here after. Obinna stared at her. You are working 2 jobs and still coming here? My mother is sick, she said without complaint in her voice. I know what it feels like when things are hard and nobody checks on you. I did not want you to be alone like that. She left the room before he could find the words to respond. Obinna sat down slowly and looked at the tray in front of him. The soup smelled like something a mother would make, careful, warm, and full of quiet love. He picked up the fufu and ate in silence. Outside, Port Harcourt continued its noise. But inside that room, something had shifted in Obinna Castellano's chest. Something small but impossible to ignore. Who was this girl really? 2 more weeks passed. The harmattan had settled properly over Port Harcourt now, coating car windscreens with fine dust every morning and turning the sky a pale, hazy white. The city felt dry and restless the way it always did in that season. Obinna felt the same way. The loneliness of a man pretending to be poor was a strange kind of loneliness. He could not call his business associates. They had begun to distance themselves the moment the bankruptcy story spread. He could not visit his usual spots. It would break the illusion. Even some of his cousins, who used to call weekly, had gone suddenly quiet in a way that said everything without saying anything at all. But Chisom kept coming. Every 2 days, sometimes every day, she appeared at his gate with something. A plate of food, a sachet of Lipton tea, once a small bunch of bananas she said she bought from a woman outside the hotel where she worked. She never stayed long. She would drop the food, ask if he needed anything, and leave before he could think of a reason to ask her to stay. One evening, Obinna was sitting on the veranda when she arrived later than usual. Her uniform was still on, her face carrying the particular tiredness of someone who had been on their feet since dawn. She had a small polythene bag in her hand. You are just coming from the hotel? He asked. Yes. She sat down on the lower step without being invited, the way someone does when their body simply refuses to stand anymore. Double shift today. One of the other cleaners did not come. Obinna looked at her for a moment. How is your mother? Something moved across Chisom's face, a brief shadow that she quickly tucked away. She is managing. The drugs are expensive. But we are managing. What is wrong with her? Kidney problem. The doctor in Braithwaite Memorial said she needs to come back every month for dialysis. She paused. We have missed 2 sessions already. Obinna felt the words land in his chest like stones dropping into still water. He wanted to tell her the truth right then, that the bankruptcy was fake, that he had money, that he could help her mother tomorrow morning if she would only let him. But he held it in. The test was not over. And he needed to be sure, completely sure, before he revealed anything. You are doing all of this, he said quietly, working 2 jobs, feeding me, checking on me, and your mother is sick at home. Chisom, why? She looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile but carried the same warmth. My father lost his job when I was 12, she said. We had nothing for almost 2 years. Our neighbors used to send food sometimes. Not plenty, just small. But it kept us alive. She looked down at her hands. I have never forgotten that. When somebody is down, you help them stand. That is all. Obinna said nothing. He just looked at her. He thought about Adaeze again. He could not help it. He had heard through Emeka that she and Barrister Festus were now openly together, attending events in Port Harcourt and posting photographs on social media. She had moved on with the speed of someone who had already been planning to. It stung. Not because he still wanted her, but because he had genuinely believed in her. Eat something before you go, Obinna said, standing up. I still have the stew from yesterday. Chisom shook her head. I'm fine, Oga. You should keep it. Chisom. His voice was firm but gentle. Sit down and eat. She looked up at him, surprised by his tone. Then, slowly, something in her face relaxed. She sat back down on the step and accepted the plate he brought out 5 minutes later without another word of protest. They ate together on the veranda as the night air settled over Jir, dry and cool and smelling faintly of dust. No big conversation. No performance. Just two people sharing a quiet evening in the middle of difficult days. When Chisom finally stood to leave, she adjusted her bag on her shoulder and said, Good night, Oga Obinna. Good night, Chisom, he said. Then, almost to himself, he added, Thank you. She waved without turning back and disappeared through the gate. Obinna stood on the veranda alone, staring at the empty street. The harmattan wind moved through the compound, lifting a few dry leaves and carrying them sideways into the dark. He made a decision that night, quietly, without drama. The test had given him everything he needed. But there was still one final thing left to do. He needed to face Adaeze one last time. And this time he would not hold anything back. Emeka called on a Friday morning, just as Obinna was finishing a cup of black tea on his veranda. The harmattan had thinned slightly overnight, and pale sunlight was pushing through the haze, warming the compound in slow, lazy patches. She will be at Coral Terrace restaurant tomorrow afternoon, Emeka said. Festus is traveling to Abuja for a court case. She is having lunch with Priscilla. Obinna set his cup down. How sure are you? Priscilla told her driver. Her driver told my contact. Emeka paused. Brother, are you ready for this? Obinna looked out at the compound, the same compound Adaeze had walked through dozens of times, heels clicking on the paving stones, perfume trailing behind her. He remembered the first time he brought her here. She had stood in the sitting room and said, This house has good energy. He had believed every word. I am ready, he said. Coral Terrace restaurant sat on a quiet stretch of Remula Road, tucked behind a row of whistling pine trees that gave it the feeling of being slightly removed from the rest of the city. It was the kind of place Port Harcourt's comfortable class liked. Not too loud, not too cheap, with tablecloths that were always clean and waiters who knew how to disappear politely between orders. Obinna arrived early and chose a table near the window. He ordered water and waited. Adaeze walked in at exactly 10 minutes past 1. She was dressed well, a rust-colored Ankara blouse, gold earrings, her hair freshly done. She looked rested, unbothered, like a woman who had made a clean decision and was sleeping well because of it. She saw him before she reached Priscilla's table. Her steps slowed. Her expression shifted, not guilt, not grief, just a careful kind of calculation, the look of someone quickly deciding how to handle an unexpected situation. She walked over. Obinna. She said his name the way people say the name of someone they used to know. Sit down, Adaeze, he said quietly. Please. She hesitated, then sat across from him, her handbag on her lap like a small shield. Priscilla, watching from across the room, did not move. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant hummed softly around them. Cutlery on plates, low conversations, the distant sound of Afrobeats from the kitchen radio. I heard you are doing well, Obinna said. Adaeze lifted one shoulder in a half shrug. Life continues. Festus is a good man? Her jaw tightened slightly. That is not your business anymore. You are right, he said. He looked at her calmly. I just want to understand something. 2 years, Adaeze. We built something for 2 years. When the money disappeared, was there nothing left? Not even one reason to stay. She looked at him for a long moment. And then she did something he did not expect. She told the truth. Not cruelly, but with the flat, tired honesty of someone who had stopped pretending. Obinna, you are a good man, she said. But good men without money are just good men. They cannot give you a life. They cannot give you security. I grew up watching my mother suffer because my father was a good man with empty pockets. I promised myself I would never live like that. So it was always about the money. It was always about survival, she corrected. Do not make me the villain for being honest. You were not honest, he said, his voice still quiet but carrying something firm underneath it. You told me you loved me. You let me introduce you to my mother. You accepted my ring. That was not honesty, Adaeze. That was a performance. Her eyes flickered. Something crossed her face, not quite shame but a shadow of it. So what do you want from me? She asked. An apology? No, Obinna said, leaning back. I just wanted to hear you say it out loud. And you just did. He stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, and looked at her one last time. She was still beautiful. She was still composed. But sitting there in Coral Terrace restaurant, with her handbag on her lap and her careful eyes watching him, she looked smaller than he had ever seen her. Take care of yourself, he said. He walked out of the restaurant into the dry afternoon air. His driver was waiting by the gate. Emeka was in the passenger seat, his phone already in his hand. Ready? Emeka asked. Obinna looked at the restaurant one final time. Behind those pine trees, inside that clean, comfortable room, Adaeze Nwosu was probably already composing herself, already deciding what to tell Priscilla. But it no longer mattered. Because tomorrow Port Harcourt would wake up to a very different story. Make the calls, Obinna said. It is time to end this. The news broke on a Monday morning the way all big stories break in Port Harcourt, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. It started with a short press release on the Fortbridge Holdings official website. Then Emeka forwarded it to 3 business journalists he trusted. By 9 o'clock it was on 2 major news blogs. By noon it was on every WhatsApp group in the city. Fortbridge Holdings MD Obinna Castellano reveals bankruptcy was a test. The statement was simple and direct. It explained that the collapse of Fortbridge Holdings had been carefully staged. That no real debt existed. That the company was healthy, the accounts untouched, and the assets fully intact. It explained why, that the CEO had discovered reason to question the loyalty of those closest to him and had chosen to find the truth before it was too late. It named no names. But Port Harcourt did not need names. Everyone already knew about Adaeze. By midday the comments were flooding in. People who had whispered about Obinna's downfall were now whispering about Adaeze Nwosu, the woman who had abandoned her billionaire fiancé and moved to another man the moment the money seemed gone. Photographs from Distinction Lounge began circulating again, this time with different captions. Her friends went quiet on social media. Priscilla deleted 3 posts. Adaeze herself called Obinna 4 times between noon and 2 o'clock. He did not pick up. She sent a message on the 5th attempt. It was long, full of explanations and accusations and a version of events that made her the misunderstood one. He read it once, set his phone face down on the desk and did not respond. There was nothing left to say to her. That chapter had closed itself. What mattered now was Chisom. Obinna drove to her 1-room apartment in Rumyafike that same afternoon, unannounced. The compound was a simple one. 6 rooms facing a shared courtyard, a single tap by the wall, a line of washed clothes drying in the harmattan wind. Children played by the entrance, chasing each other with sticks and laughter. He knocked on the 3rd door. There was movement inside, then the door opened. Chisom stood in the doorway in a plain house dress, her hair wrapped in a tie, looking at him the way someone looks when they cannot immediately make sense of what they are seeing. Oga Obinna? Her voice was careful, confused. Can I come in? He asked. She stepped aside. The room was small but clean. A mattress on one side, a wooden shelf with a few books and provisions, a plastic chair, a small fan in the corner. On the mattress, propped up against 2 pillows, was an older woman. She was thin, her face tired but gentle. She looked at Obinna with quiet, curious eyes. My mother, Chisom said softly. Mama, this is my former employer. The woman smiled weakly. You are welcome, my son. Obinna greeted her with the respect his own mother had taught him. 2 hands, a slight bow. Then he turned back to Chisom, who was watching him with her arms folded loosely across her chest, waiting. Sit down, Chisom, he said. I am fine standing. Please, he said. Sit down. She sat on the edge of the plastic chair. He remained standing because what he was about to say felt like something that needed to be delivered on his feet. The bankruptcy was not real, he said. The room went still. Even the sound from the courtyard seemed to fade. Chisom stared at him. What? Fortbridge Holdings never collapsed. I staged it. All of it, the documents, the rumors, the frozen accounts. I did it because I overheard something that made me doubt the people around me. I needed to know who would stay when the money was gone. Her expression shifted slowly, confusion folding into understanding, understanding folding into something he could not fully name. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. So all this time, she started. All this time you were the only one who showed up, he said. You worked 2 jobs and still came to bring me food. You sat on my veranda and shared what little you had. You treated me like a human being when everyone else was treating me like a failed investment. Her eyes had gone glassy. She pressed her lips together tightly. I am not here to embarrass you, Obinna said. I am here because you deserve to hear the truth. And because I have something to tell you. He reached into his jacket and placed a brown envelope on the shelf beside her books. That is a full payment for your mother's dialysis sessions. Every missed one, and the next 12 months covered in advance. I have already spoken to the head of nephrology at Meridian Specialist Hospital in Moscow Road. She has an appointment Thursday morning. Chisom's hand went to her mouth. There is also a letter of admission inside, he continued. I spoke to the registrar at Graceland University in Adaeze. You mentioned once that you wanted to study business administration. The first year is fully paid. Accommodazione inclusive. A single tear ran down Chisom's cheek. She did not wipe it. And when you are ready, whenever you are ready, there is a position waiting for you in Fortbridge Holdings. Administrative trainee. With a proper salary and a proper future. Her mother made a soft sound from the mattress, something between a prayer and a sob. Chisom looked at Obinna for a long moment, her face open and undone in a way that held no embarrassment, only pure, overwhelmed feeling. Why? She whispered. Because kindness should never go unanswered, he said simply. 6 months passed. Port Harcourt moved on the way cities always do. New stories replacing old ones, new scandals pushing old names out of conversation. The harmattan gave way to the rains, and the rains softened everything, washing the dust from the trees and turning the compounds green again. Obinna Castellano moved on too. But not in the way people expected. He had not rushed into anything. He had not filled the space Adaeze left with noise or distraction. Instead, he had done something quieter. He had looked honestly at his life and decided to build something that meant more than profit margins and quarterly reports. 3 months after the press release, Fortbridge Holdings officially launched the Adaeze Foundation, a non-profit arm dedicated to sponsoring young Nigerians from struggling homes through university education and vocational training. The foundation's first office opened on Agri Road in Port Harcourt, a modest building with bright paint and a small garden out front. At the launch, Obinna gave a short speech. He did not talk about Adaeze. He did not talk about betrayal or tests or revenge. He talked about a woman who had carried soup across town on a bus because she understood what it meant to be alone in hard times. Everyone in the room assumed he was speaking generally. Only Emeka knew who he meant. Chisom started at Graceland University in January, 2 weeks after her mother completed her 3rd dialysis session at Meridian Specialist Hospital. The doctors said her condition was stabilizing. The consistent treatment was making a real difference. Her mother had gained a little weight, was sleeping better, and had started sitting outside in the mornings to catch the early sun. Chisom called Obinna the evening after her first day of lectures. She was breathless with excitement, talking quickly about her business administration orientation, her roommate from Owerri, the size of the campus library, the way the harmattan felt different in Adaeze than in Port Harcourt. Obinna sat in his study and listened, smiling at his phone in the quiet way a person smiles when something genuinely good is happening. You sound happy, he said when she paused. I am, she said. And then, more softly, I never thought this was possible for me. I had stopped imagining it. Never stop imagining, he said. That is the only rule. By March, Chisom was thriving. Her first semester grades were strong. Her business administration lecturer had already singled her out twice in class for her sharp thinking. She was making friends, adjusting to campus life with the same quiet determination she had carried into every difficult situation before. On weekends, she took the bus back to Rumjefijk to spend time with her mother. The one-room apartment looked the same from the outside, but inside things were different. There was a proper bed now, a small refrigerator, better food. Her mother's medication was organized in a little wooden box by the window. The tired, hollowed look that had lived in the older woman's face for years was slowly, steadily lifting. One Saturday afternoon, Chisom sat beside her mother on the new bed, both of them sharing a plate of fresh garden egg and osaji, the kind of ordinary, peaceful moment that only feels precious when you have lived through enough hard ones. That man, her mother said, chewing thoughtfully. Obinna. He has a good heart. Chisom looked down at the plate. He does. You like him, her mother said. It was not a question. Chisom was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, small and private, the kind of smile a person keeps mostly for themselves. Mama, I am a student now. Let me face my books. Her mother laughed, a full, warm sound that filled the small room and spilled out through the open window into the courtyard. It was the most beautiful sound Chisom had heard in years. Obinna heard about the Foundation's first full cohort in April. 43 young men and women from Rivers, Bayelsa, and Imo states, all enrolled in universities and trade schools across the South. He read their names one evening in his study, going through the list slowly, pausing on each one. A boy from Okrika who wanted to study engineering. A girl from Yenagoa who wanted to be a nurse. A young man from Owerri who had been selling pure water for 2 years while saving his jam result, waiting for something to change. Something had changed. Obinna set the list down on his desk and looked out the window at the Port Harcourt night. The city lights blurred softly through the glass, the distant sound of traffic mixing with the rain that had just begun to fall. He thought about the hallway where he had stood frozen, briefcase in hand, listening to Adaeze's voice on the other side of a door. He had walked out of his own house that evening feeling broken. He had driven to Emeka's office feeling betrayed. He had gone to bed that night feeling like a fool. But standing in that same hallway had also set something in motion, something that led to 43 names on a list, to a woman's kidney healing in a hospital on Moscow Road, to a young girl sitting in a university library in Alele with a future spread open in front of her like a clean page. Pain, he had come to understand, was not always the end of something. Sometimes it was simply the beginning of something better, wearing a very convincing disguise. He closed the folder, turned off the desk lamp, and sat for a while in the comfortable dark. Outside, the rain fell steadily over Port Harcourt, washing the streets clean, filling the gutters, drumming softly on rooftops across the city. It fell on Coral Terrace Restaurant and on Agri Road and on the compound in Rumyafike where a woman slept soundly for the first time in years. And somewhere in Alele, a young woman with a quiet kind of strength was bent over her textbooks, building the future she had once stopped allowing herself to imagine. Some people leave your life and take pieces of you with them. But the right ones, the ones who show up with soup on a dusty afternoon, the ones who sit on your steps when their own feet are tired, those ones do not take anything. They only add. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?